we can screen people out very quickly by offering a quick phone conversation.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Wealthy Fitness Entrepreneur. And today, Doug and I are going to talk about hiring. It seems to be one of the more important and maybe more prominent topics for later stage or more advanced business owners. The hiring landscape has definitely evolved over the past few years. So we're going to unpack some of that. So, Doug, get us started.
Yeah, I was thinking about a topic, and it's definitely a common theme. I would say if we just kind of put a time frame of like post-COVID, how we are hiring, we're still very much, at least as of this recording in May of 24, still very much, I feel like an employee market and on the employer side, looking for people, it can be challenging. So that's where I would think about it more from a constantly recruiting standpoint, right? If we start there and how we maybe are constantly recruiting for team members, even if to always kind of have our bench built, right? Always have some names on the sidelines that we can pull to because we are not in a position where we are probably always hiring or are in a position to overhire, meaning overstaff. We're pretty lean models, of course. So with that said, I think some to start with some tips on recruiting from my end, and then I'm sure Pat has plenty of stuff with his background. But from my end, some things that always worked well for just building a pool of people. We can certainly talk about once we do have contacts, how to actually screen them. But to just start with, how do we find people that may be good fits? The first thing I would think about is we all at this stage probably have an email list and probably have plenty of phone numbers and contacts in our database. And oftentimes when I talk to a gym owner and they tell me that they're hiring, the first question I ask them is, did you send it out to your email list? And they're like, no, I posted on Indeed or I posted on social media. And I think the hesitation or the thought process with that is like, well, my email list is more for like members versus hires, trainers, and maybe even admin. But my thought process is, even if my email list, there's nobody on there, the awareness that I'm hiring, everybody knows people. And we're only a couple degrees away from anybody that we need to get a hold of. So if we put it out to the list that we are hiring, usually somebody replies and says, "Oh, thanks so much for sending this my way. My nephew is graduating from university. Maybe he's a good fit. I'll forward this to him." Or my sister is looking for a career change or whatever, right? It's usually not like a direct somebody on the email list. So that's where I would start is, certainly from a tactical level, emailing it out to your list. And then the other tip before I pass it back to Pat would be hospitality is at the core of what we do, right? We provide a service and we want good customer service, which is hospitality, wow moments. We can teach people the X's and the O's. And so when we're recruiting, oftentimes I always had good success looking at people that I might know that are in the hospitality industry, meaning restaurants, hotels, inns, things like that, that frankly don't have great hours for families. It's a lot of weekends, it's a lot of late nights. And so if you can get them still with a strong hospitality background, but into a field where that hospitality trait carries over, but yeah, the hours aren't 9 to 5, but they're certainly more family friendly than late nights and weekends. So those would be, from a recruiting perspective, two things that I would consider.
So the two that I would suggest that provide some opportunities, and in some cases, I don't hear a whole lot of people doing one of them. The first is really building relationships with the local university. And so when a lot of people talk about, hey, I've tried to go build an internship program or something like that, there's so many different ways to approach this, right? Like it's not just, oh, I went to the department chair and they're not really excited about this, or I went to career planning and placement. You can go to coaches, particular sports teams. Like if you're in a smaller market Or if you're in a big market, you don't necessarily always have to go to the Power Five Division One school. You can go to the Division Three school, the Division Two school, the NAIA school, and you can build relationships with the baseball coach, the softball coach, the track coach, and obviously they want to have be advocates for their players, and they have a closer relationship with their player almost always than people that work in the department that the student's majoring in. So I think that's a really untapped or underappreciated opportunity. And having worked in planning and placement for athletes during the first leg of my career, I would see all these people around the athletic department looking for part-time jobs, looking for internships, trying to find ways to kind of get into their chosen field or find things that they could do that may be a little bit outside the traditional internship schedule or something else because their sports schedule was not necessarily the same as a lot of the other students' schedules. And I think there's so much opportunity there because the athletes, in many cases, they've been exposed to practical weight room stuff, strength and conditioning stuff, not just textbook education. And the other thing about it is they're accustomed to some non-traditional, non 9 to 5 hours with practices and travel and that sort of thing. So I've had really good success there. And then finally, the one that I think is easily the most overlooked is thinking of prospective employees, kind of along the lines that Doug kicked things off saying, okay, we have these prospective employees in our database and we're always hiring or whatever else. Well, if you think about the buying cycle when somebody becomes a training client, there are people who are ready now and then there are people who are not ready right now, but we still have them on that list. Well, I think if you reframe the ask and you're sending it out your email list, you're posting it on social media and you say, hey, you know what? I've spent a lot of years in this industry. I love what we do. I love mentoring young people. So if you know anybody who might potentially be interested in this field down the line, if you know anybody who may eventually be interested in a career change, I would love to sit down and see if I could help them, give them some advice, mentor them. Now what we're doing is casting a much wider net, right? Because we're basing this on interest or potential desire instead of immediate like readiness. And if we do that, you can get more conversations started. You'll find people on your email list. You'll find people in your client base that are responsive to that. You will have people, like, for example, Doug mentioned the example of, hey, I've got this friend or this kid that's about to graduate from university. Well, the timing has to sync up really well for that to work. They have to be graduating. Whereas if they're a sophomore, they may have thought, well, that's not for me. But if they're a sophomore who's interested in that field or potentially interested in that field, now that conversation started. If there's somebody who is, in another field, but they've started to have thoughts about a career change, they're not necessarily ready to apply for a job today, but they're potentially ready to at least start to explore other options. I think that approach works for so many reasons, right? It's leading by giving. It's not leading with an ask. It is casting a net that is not timeline sensitive. And it's building up this pool of people. And invariably, you get the right person in front of you. You get to have this kind of a low risk, low consequence conversation. And if something works fast, then something works fast. But that's another way that I think that I don't hear a whole lot of people doing another way of approaching this. I don't hear a whole lot of people doing in our industry, but it works. And frankly, it's a lot of what we do when we're marketing to attract clients.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned marketing to get clients is very like the approach to go get clients. We spend a lot of time on in this industry, obviously, and rightfully so. And for some reason, we change best practices when we're going to get team members. But to some degree, it's largely the same. Like another tip I would throw out there would be to put together a sales page for your job opportunity, right? We would always, at our gym, we would always have sperlingfitness.com/coach or /jobs. It was live 365. And yeah, during certain sprints, we would drive more traffic to it, but it was a sales page. It was copywriting that talks about the opportunity. And we would drive traffic to that sales page, whether that be through emailing it out, texting the link out, whatever. It's distribution of that page, just like when you're putting together an offer for a client, it's distribution of the page. So
We do talk a lot about, like, in the marketing that you mentioned, that like having a little PS that we call super signature at the end of an email. Well, if you have three different offers or opportunities to move forward with you in a PS, you could certainly use one of them at all times for that kind of mentorship opportunity or a job opportunity or anything else. And you just have to detach yourself from looking like, oh, we're going to create panic with our clients because they're going to wonder who's leaving or something else. I mean, just frame it as, hey, we're growing, or you want to mentor some people who are getting into the industry or something like that. Frame it in a positive light, and you're not going to get any questioning, any pushback.
yeah, for sure. So if we the second half of this would be, we got some applicants and how do we kind of move them through that process? And I think we'll do another episode on actually onboarding them and once we've chosen the applicant. But there's then also this, before that, there's this in between of, hopefully the distribution has caused at least a handful of people to raise their hands. And if you are actively in a hiring mode or spot, how do you decide, who you're going to hire? And in my opinion, the easiest thing to do is to, like we talked about earlier, keep that top of the funnel. If you think about it as a funnel, keep that top of the funnel wide, get as many applicants as you can. Don't make it too hard to apply. That was the other thing that, we would always spend time on, is make it very easy to apply, because we can screen people out very quickly by offering a quick phone conversation, right? And so when we would hire, we would always, anytime we got an applicant, we would always shoot them a text. Hey, thanks so much for applying. Here's a link to book a 15-minute call. And what inevitably happens is you have a third that never respond to that because they applied and you were one of 10 things they applied to that day, and they were never going to do anything anyways. You have some that, take you up on it and book it. And then you have some that maybe have a question before they book it or what have you, right? But you'll all automatically filter just by sending that text out. And then you book a phone interview. Don't take up your time too much yet. Just book a time to chat on the phone. And a little tip is, we would always ask them to call us. So let's say that they book at 10:30. We would say, please call us at this number at 10:30. And again, inevitably, you filter out just automatically people that don't call you. They ghost you. Or they call you at 10:40 and they're like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot I was running late. And to me, that's like the honeymoon is your interview. And if you can't show up on time for an interview, I don't have a great gut feeling that you're going to be showing up on time for a 5:30 a.m. session. So the phone interview can be a great filter for, if you do get 5, 6, 7 applicants, to not waste your time of 5, 6, 7 in-person meetings. You can filter that usually down to like 2 or 3 good ones that you then probably want to meet with in person and make the call from there. But love the phone interview to filter out at the next phase.
Well, and I think the kind of filtering piece that you talked about, all too often, I see a lot of owners get hung up on credentials and experience. And I don't want to say that it's not important at all. I mean, again, I have experience working at a university. I value education. But, if somebody in that honeymoon phase isn't on their best behavior, if they're not prompt and showing up on time, if they're not paying attention, if they're not worried about the details at that phase, they're not going to be later. So if I'm looking for certain things at certain stages of this hiring journey, the first things that I'm looking for are the promptness, people skills, attentiveness, those sorts of things, before I get too too concerned with experience or credentials or anything like that.
Yeah. The phone review would always be a great time for us to filter out like humility and curiosity, right? Like if they spend the whole time on the phone talking about themselves and not asking questions about the job or about you, that's generally a sign that, yeah, they may be confident, which is great, but they probably are not going to be super humble. They're probably going to be hard to, they're oftentimes going to want to do their own thing compared to following the company way of doing things. And so those are, again, just red flags that frankly just save you time that I don't want to filter out too early. And I think that's one of the things maybe we can end with here is like when we're doing those tactics that we talked about earlier, I'm a huge fan of not like as long as you have a smile and you're interested in helping people, I want you to apply because I will gladly spend 10 or 15 minutes talking to you to see if some of the other details, nuances are right because I would rather have 10 people apply and then filter it down to two or three and meet with the two or three and now have a good solid one to choose from, as opposed to make it extremely hard to apply, whether that be my credentials requirements are so high or I make it be a 3-page application to apply, whatever. I might only get one or two people to choose from. So I think you're narrowing your pool of people. Just use the phone interview to filter out from there. And then, of course, at that point, you meet with them in person and pick your best candidate from there.
I think that I think that it's a little bit of a callback to something that you said earlier, right? I mean, again, it mirrors the way that I think we both think about marketing in general, right? Marketing to attract clients is very similar to marketing to attract new hires. And again, if somebody has desire, we can figure a lot of other stuff out. If there's a strong desire, if we cast a wide enough net and they've got some of those character traits that we're looking for and they've got a desire to learn, a desire to improve, the education's out there, the ability to introduce them to your system and help them grow into becoming a competent piece of what you do is certainly possible. And frankly, I know that we had a number of people that I hired in both my health club and the two locations of the training business that started out because they had character traits that were really attractive. And we used the early stage of their time with us in other kind of maybe lower consequence roles, lower paying roles. Well, they learned and then groomed them up because, I mean, let's face it, if you narrow too soon, you end out with almost always an insufficient list of potential candidates. Whereas, yeah, I mean, you may find somebody who on paper wasn't the best candidate that you'd have, but have all the character traits that you're looking for, eager to learn, willing to follow directions, and they just absorb everything that you're doing in their onboarding, may end up being some of the best people you've hired. I know that's been the case in my businesses.
For sure, for sure. So I think in a part two of episode here, we'll cover okay, we've got our candidate. How do we actually onboard them and get them into our system?
All right, we'll be back with part two in the next episode of the Wealthy Fitness Entrepreneur.